Evaluating Premises, an Introduction to Truth and Acceptability. As you have learned in earlier modules, an important part of critical thinking is evaluating the premises of an argument. Premises provide the support for a particular conclusion. If the premises are not correct, then the conclusion may not be valid, and the argument is wrong or at least weak. But what does it mean for a premise to be correct? In this module, you will learn about two different standards for evaluating correctness: truth and acceptability. Is it true? Remember learning about deductive arguments? A deductive argument is the type of argument in which the premises necessarily lead to the conclusion. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. In a deductive argument, you cannot accept the premises as true without also accepting the conclusion. Deductive arguments must rely on facts as premises. They can't be opinions. It may seem like a simple matter to assess the truth of facts, but as you will learn in future modules, that's not always the case. There are a lot of facts that people offer about the world that can be very difficult to evaluate. Consider, for example, facts about population size. If someone told you that there are 314,968,052 people living in the U.S. right now, could you prove that claim is true? True down to the very last digit? Considering that people are born and die pretty much constantly, it seems like it would be pretty hard to pin down such an exact number in order to state the claim is definitively true. We can't say whether the number of 314,968,052 is exactly right, too high or too low. While this population claim is hard to prove, it's also hard to disprove. But more often, while factual premises can be hard to prove, they can be much easier to disprove. Take, for example, the claim that all dogs have black fur when they are born. It would be pretty difficult to prove this statement. You would need to examine every single puppy that was born. But all you need to do to disprove it is to find one puppy born with non-black fur. One example of the statement not being true is enough to conclude that the statement is not true. So, when you are evaluating factual premises, remember to look at them from all angles. If you're not sure how to prove the premise is true, consider whether you can find evidence to disprove it. Being able to show that a premise is false can be just as useful in evaluating the argument as a whole. In a later module, you'll learn more about the difference between verifying a claim as true and showing a claim is false. Is it acceptable? In contrast with deductive arguments, an inductive argument is a type of argument in which the premises provide support for, but do not definitively prove, the conclusion. For inductive arguments, it's possible for someone to accept the premises but reject the conclusion. Inductive arguments may rely on both facts and opinions, but generally some or all of the premises in an inductive argument cannot be definitively proven or disproven. So, we have to find another way to evaluate how acceptable the premises are, rather than trying to determine their truth. The standard of acceptability is both easier and harder to utilize. It is easier in the sense that it does not set the bar as high as the standard of truth. To judge a claim to be true, we have to offer complete and total evidence for it, which is usually pretty hard to come by. Remember the example about the white swans? But if all we have to do is judge a claim to be acceptable, we just need enough evidence to support it, even if it is not definitive. At the same time, this standard is harder to use because we have to figure out how much evidence is enough. At what point do we have enough support or evidence for a claim to determine that we can decide it is acceptable? And do you think it is likely that everyone evaluating an argument using the standard of acceptability will have the same baseline for, quote, enough? More likely, people will disagree about whether a premise is acceptable, not because they disagree about what the evidence is, but because they disagree about whether it is enough to justify the premise as acceptable. While only factual premises can be determined to be true or not, both facts and opinions can be evaluated for their level of acceptability. Facts that cannot be definitively proven or verified due to practical difficulties such as examining every single swan in existence can be evaluated as more or less acceptable based on how much evidence there is to support the premise. For example, we often use the results of surveys or opinion polls to draw conclusions about what a much larger group of people think or believe. Imagine a classmate says, only 33% of Americans approve of the job the president is doing. Now, before accepting that claim as true or acceptable, you should ask how she knows that. What if she says, well, I asked both of my parents and my sister if they approve, and only my sister said yes. So that's 1/3 or 33% approval. Would you accept her claim that this reflects the opinions of all Americans? How about if, instead, she responded, I saw it on the news. They showed the results of a survey of 10,000 people, and 33% of those surveyed approve. They didn't talk to every American, so we can determine whether the claim is true or not. They used the opinions of 10,000 Americans, and that provides a better basis for acceptability than a sample of 3. Determining whether a premise is acceptable or not becomes even more challenging when you're dealing with opinions. It may be tempting to go along with the idea that everyone is entitled to their own opinion. But the task of thinking critically requires you to evaluate arguments for issues and problems about which there are likely to be a variety of opinions. Economic, social, political, and moral problems require solutions. And in order to pick the best solution, you must be able to choose among differing opinions. These problems are rarely solved by facts alone, but depend on the relative acceptability of different beliefs and opinions about how things are and how they should be. In a later module, you will learn more about how to evaluate opinions. Evaluating whether a premise is true or acceptable can be a difficult process. As you apply your critical thinking skills to the variety of arguments you will see, read, and hear, you will come to realize that premises come from a wide range of sources. The claims people make originate from their own thoughts and ideas, from personal experiences, from the application of logic or reason, from the use of scientific method, and so on. Premises may be derived from personal testimony, surveys, formal experiments, and logic-based reasoning. They may be presented in words, numbers, and images. Regardless of the source, your critical thinking task is the same. Determine whether the premises are true or acceptable.